Alright, so we're going to go over chapter 9. So let me pull up the PowerPoint real quick from your Creswell text. So this chapter focuses on how to write and compose a research report and how to evaluate the quality of such a report. So such reports emphasize the audience in writing it in a non-discriminatory way, an ethical, scholarly way. And a research report is a completed study that reports an investigation or exploration of a problem. It identifies questions to be addressed and includes data collected, analyzed, and interpreted by the researcher. So that's just the formal definition of a research report. So when writing a research report, you have to write for your audience. And you're going to see there's your forum post this week is about that. So there's different audiences and they're going to have different standards. So here's some examples of the different audiences. You can have journal reviewers, policymakers, faculty members, the researcher itself. So those are there for you to read. Okay, so here's table 9.1 from your book on page 267. And it goes over the different standards for the varying audiences you're writing to. So the first one is your faculty members, and they need standards that need to be a governing force of the research proposal. The journal reviewers, the second one on the table, they need standards that they will actually provide yearly standards, so you can look those up. So whenever you're going to go and publish your research article, they will actually have them posted and you can look them up, and they usually post those yearly. And so when I have gotten my research published into different educational journals, what my chair would do when I was a student, he would contact the magazine or wherever it's going to be published in, and to find out exactly how they wanted it formatted. And so you might have to tweak a little few things, like how we built it in class together, and then when he would submit it to be published, he would tweak it just to how they would want it, and then I would get it published. And then he would be a second name on the article, so if he helped me edit it and things like that, the first person, I don't know if y'all know this, the first person, author name listed for the journal articles or dissertation or whatever it may be, well, dissertation would be one author, but you know what I'm saying. With the first person listed is the primary author. And then if somebody else worked on that with that author, then they're listed next in the order of how much they contributed. Kind of like a list of ingredients. Like the first item listed in your ingredients list is the primary thing. Like if it's water or sugar, that's the most quantity in that food item. Same thing for authors. Okay, guys, it's the same concept. So the first author did the most contribution into the actual writing itself, and then you can add. So that's why my chair, he would be listed as later, and so he would help do that. Okay, so the third one are your policymakers. They want research proposals. When you submit it to them, they want them to be clear, they need it to be applicable, and they want ideas. Like, give me ideas, okay? So let's go. There's some more audiences here listed. So depending on who your audience is will determine how you're going to structure your research proposal. So you can get the nitty gritty and the bones of it, but then as you are going to go and think, who does this need to go to? You need to tailor fit it to that particular audience, okay? And so there's some more reading for you. Okay, so there's going to be different types of research reports, and I've already mentioned a few of these. You have dissertations, your thesis. For our doctoral program, we call it a capstone, and so that's something that's kind of like a dissertation. There's journal articles, conference papers, and conference proposals. I actually had one of my articles, and I went and presented it in Philadelphia, and I went to a conference and I flew up there and I presented it. And so you just have to do a presentation on it. And I think we talk about that later, so let me just hold off. Um, the last one, let me go to the next slide. Okay, so this one, it says the different types of dissertations and theses. Whenever you do those, it's kind of like your capstone also, and then you're making a research proposal for this course, so this could later turn into your capstone. Okay, they will usually, you're going to have to defend it before a faculty committee, and so that's called a dissertation committee, and so that's where you would go and you would present it before you even start it, and then at the end when you finished it, you go and defend it before them. So that's a really neat thing to be able to do. Okay, so what are the types of research reports, dissertation, thesis, proposals? So there's always, you're going to have a plan before you start writing. You're always going to write it in future tense, like what's going to take place. Stops with the methods or procedures, so there's no results. That's just for your proposal, like what y'all are doing for this class. And then you always give us the purpose of your proposal. So help think through all the aspects of the study, and you're like going to anticipate what problems that could happen. Okay, so a well-defined proposal does the following. So it facilitates obtaining permissions. So that's like your study site or your educational setting. It will also provide information to gatekeepers. Those are the ones in authority. So you're going to provide the information to those people. And then you're going to provide criteria to assess the quality of a project. Okay? So whenever you are defining in making your proposal, these are the things that you have to do. We want to make sure that what we create and work on is scholarly, it has high standards, and people will read your work and be able to judge, just like you do when you read other people's scholarly writing. You can judge whether their research is scholarly, if it's met all like high criteria standards, if they went through the proper protocols and things like that. So it's important that we learn this and then we implement them into our practices. Okay, so there's different types of research reports. There's your quantitative and qualitative dissertation and thesis proposals. The formats will differ somewhat. You'll have, some will go down a theoretical perspective, so that's for your qualitative proposals. It's a less standardized structure. Now your literature review is your quantitative proposal, and they have three major sections. They have your introduction, your review of the literature, and a methods section. So we're still talking about these different types of proposals. So here are great examples for research proposal formatting. You can see quantitative formatting on the left. So this is a great outline of how it should be formatted and put together. And then here is your qualitative formatting. So they're not going to be the same because your methodology is different. So there you can see the differences. Okay. That's a good slide, the one I just left, for you to keep and print out and to always have handy, I would say. Okay, so now we're going to move on and start talking about journal articles. We just finished talking about research proposals. So now let's talk about journal articles. That's another type of research report. Journal articles are what we cite in scholarly writing, and we use those pretty often. You've found a lot of those in your EBSCO and Google Scholar and your ERIC databases and those searches. The editor will make a decision. They'll either like accept it, revise it, submit it, and reject it. So that's kind of like the process like I spoke to you about earlier. You submit your article to them, and then they will kick it back and say, okay, I need you to fix this and that, and then you resubmit it, and then hopefully they approve it, and then it gets accepted for publication. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about conference papers and proposals. This is kind of what I talked about earlier Your conference papers, your research report is presented to an audience at a state, regional, national, or international conference, typically sponsored by a professional association like ERA, AERA. It's similar link to journal articles. So that's kind of what I presented when I went to Philadelphia and presented there. Your conference proposal is a brief proposal to present a study at a conference. So this is what you could present to them that you could submit to them on what you want to present there. It could just give you guidelines provided by a conference association, and it's typically just like a 15-20 minute presentation. I didn't have to do that. I was just able to submit it. I didn't have to do a presentation as well. So that was good. So it's just kind of different. Like all organizations are different. They kind of have their own requirements of what they want you to do and how to do it. And all you have to do is just figure out what they want, and then you just do it, and then you can go and submit it. So not too difficult. So here's some sample guidelines for conference proposals. For ERA, that's called the American Educational Research Association. So here's like a list of different requirements that they might have. And those can change. So I would always go and check and verify. Okay. So your final type of research proposals, research reports, are reports for policymakers. You can present these to practitioners, so like in an educational setting, and they have the guidelines listed here. You can find them on page 272 of your textbook as well. So there's some of the guidelines that you can be familiar with. So being able to identify the underlying structure of a report will help you write a study as well as understand one. And that's like the biggest thing. I know at first it's kind of daunting because you're reading all of this scholarly language. It's a different language, okay? But the more you immerse yourself in it and read it, the more you get familiar with the terminology and the jargon, and you're going to be able to understand it better. So that's why we want to have you find a lot of those articles and compare them and contrast them and look at the different methodologies that they're using and figure out how you could change it, because you're really constructively thinking about it and being able to dissect it. Okay. There's 6 steps to the research process. So if we're going to look at the physical structure of a research report, there always are going to have different levels of a heading in a study, and you've learned that. And I really like how on your APA manual, the first front cover, it gives you the examples of those level headings. So it's kind of like a real easy way to just glance and see, okay, how are my headings supposed to be? So use your APA manual like that. There's 6 steps in the research project process. Remember, we've learned those, but just to go over them, you have your research problem, your literature review, the purpose statement, your research questions or hypothesis, data collection, analysis, and reporting format. So in your report, you'll also have your research questions or hypothesis and the answers, and then the structures of different types of reports, qualitative and quantitative. So you know they're going to be different based upon which one those are. So that's just the physical structure of the actual reports. So now we're going to look more about how you're going to structure it. So we're still looking at how you're supposed to structure these. We talked about all the different kinds. Now we know that there's different structure formats. The quantitative report structure, the body has 5 major sections. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just know that. Knowing these sections also allows you, as you read the studies, to know where to look for the information. You know that in the body of the paper, they're going to have a results section, okay? And that's going to give you a lot, like just the nuts and bolts about what happened. And then they might discuss future possibilities of what could happen in the discussion section. You might need to go to there to get some ideas. So it helps you to know where to go to look for different information that you need to know more about. Because a lot of times you can scan the articles too and get a synopsis of it. So the qualitative structure is different. So it can vary across varying reports though. Okay, so it's gonna be kind of more fluid, but here is a good guideline for that. So whenever you're designing an appropriate qualitative structure, there's going to be many variations on how the researchers report their findings. So there's different approaches, and so all of these approaches here, you can look on page 275 of your textbook and it will define them. We are going to talk about storytelling, this one right here, on the next slide. So for storytelling, it's a qualitative structure and its flexible approach to writing a qualitative report. The meaning of the study unfolds throughout descriptions, the author's reflection on the meaning of the data, a larger understanding of the phenomenon, and a return to the author's stance on the topic. So it's just kind of like you're telling a story, and it's just unfolding, and that's kind of nice about that structure. But to know more about all the other ones, you can look on in your book to know more about those. Okay, so figure 9.5 in your book goes over the structure of a qualitative storytelling report, and that's on page 277 if you want to mark that on the slide. And then in addition to following a good structure for your report, you also need to do these things, okay? So this is on page 278 of your book. So you need to be sensitive to individuals and use of language that reduces bias. Use appropriate research terms. Write and report the findings ethically. Employ a point of view consistent with quantitative and qualitative approaches. Balance research and content. Interconnect parts of the study, which we're going to go in more detail here in a second. And then advance a concise title, which we will also talk about. So here's 3 guidelines for reducing bias in language recommended by the APA. So first, describe individuals at an appropriate level of specificity. Okay, so you need to be very appropriate on how specific you are in describing those individuals. Be sensitive to labels for individuals or groups, and then acknowledge participation of people in a study. And so whenever you label somebody, keep it consistent. Like whenever I did mine, I looked at academic achievement across different grade levels for race. And so what I did is I kept it consistent on how I labeled each group. I did white, black, and Hispanic. So I didn't alter and say Latinos or Caucasians or African American. You just keep it consistent, and whatever the appropriate term is for our current day and age. And so right now it would be white, black, and Hispanic, and that's what we used. Okay. Okay, so encoding. Use appropriate terms throughout. For example, whenever you're calling the qualitative sampling random instead of purposeful, it shows your lack of understanding of the 2 approaches. So just know, like if you're writing something statistically significant, that you write that at the appropriate times. So you want to make sure that you understand the process of the terminology that you're conducting. Otherwise, they're gonna know. They're gonna see, they didn't understand that right. And there's actually dictionaries, and in your book it talks about this, and I would like to get my hands on one. Oh, sorry guys, that's my dinner bell. My kids are downstairs, so okay. Let's see. Anywho, there's dictionaries that go over terms for qualitative studies and quantitative studies, and I want to get my hands on those. That would be very helpful. Okay, go to the next slide. Let's see. So research ethics should be done to honor and reflect right or wrong conduct. Okay? You just want to be ethical. As Christians, I know we have a good grasp of this. It needs to be honestly reported, shared with participants, and not plagiarized, and not biased. Okay? Quantitative, for appropriate point of view. So in quantitative, investigators are in the background. They narrate in third person. Okay, so that's the appropriate point of view if you're a quantitative reporter. You're going to be in the background when you're writing your report, and you're going to be in third person. So you'll never use words like I or we. Okay, that's too personal. But on the flip side, for qualitative research, when you write that report, you're going to be in the foreground, and you're going to use first person narrations like I or we. So it's just complete opposite, okay? Okay, so moving forward, we've got, for a good research report, you need a balance between a discussion about research and the actual content of the study. So they say 50-50 would be good. So you don't want to just like go and talk about the methodology more than you talk about the study itself, okay? So try to keep it balanced. That kind of happens naturally because you have the different sections that you have to write, and so it really does kind of happen naturally, but just for, for food for thought there. Now, this is important, and you do it naturally just based upon the structure of your research. You want to try to tie your sections together in your research report. So the way that you do this in quantitative research is that your variables alone can tie it together. So it's why it's important also to be consistent in your writing, and you have your variables and you know what they are, because your title will have your variables in them. Your purpose statement will have your variables in them. Your research questions will have your variables in them. And by doing that, you're linking all of those sections of your paper together, okay? And that's important. So for qualitative study, you need to tie the sections together as well, but you do that with your central phenomenon. So you will have that in your title. You'll have your central phenomenon in your problem statement, in your purpose statement, in your research questions, in your findings, okay? So remember that as you're writing, and especially remember that as you are creating your title. Your title is super important, okay? And here we go. Here's advance of a concise title. So a scholarly manuscript includes a good title. The title should summarize the major idea of the paper in a concise and clear manner. And so there's some more details about that. That's found on page 283 of your textbook. Okay, so here's what a good title should contain. So that's on page 283 of your textbook. You need to be mindful of the quality of the research. And we talked a lot about this already, like where is it going to be? What publication standards are you following? What protocols should you be following? Have you informed your audience? Is it addressing some type of problem? So all of these things are important, okay? So a study conducted listed these items from 128 different educational quantitative articles for their shortcomings. So researchers did a study, and they looked at 128 different research articles, and they labeled all the shortcomings that they found, and then these were the top ones, okay? So the validity and reliability of data gathering procedures. So they saw discrepancies with that. There was weaknesses in the research design. There were limitations of study not stated, and inappropriate sampling. Okay, so all of those things are very important to have scholarly research. Let me move forward. So here's some of the other things that they found in their study for shortcomings. The results of the analysis weren't clearly reported, so you really want to make sure you focus on that. There's inappropriate methods to analyze the data. There's unclear writing, so you want to be very specific and concise. The assumptions were not clearly stated, and data gathering methods not clearly described. So all of those things are super important when you are writing your research. So for qualitative standards research, the criteria for good research reports varies upon the researcher's emphasis, okay? So depending on what you're emphasizing, that's going to vary upon how you write your criteria and how you assess if it's a good research or not, okay? Table 9.3 in your book on page 286 goes over Lincoln standards for evaluating quality of qualitative research. So he has a whole list of the philosophical criteria and what your research needs in order to meet those. Okay? Then, oh, sorry, I was on the wrong slide. So that's for that. Oh no, there's just two. My bad. Okay, so there you go. Then on that same table, 9.3, you're going to see Creswell and Paul standards for qualitative research. But this is going to go over all the different procedural criterias. So look at those, be familiar with that, and know that this is what it's going to need. Is it written persuasively? Are there multiple levels of analysis? Did the narrator engage the reader? So just read over those, please. And then here is Richardson's standards for qualitative research, but looking at the participatory advocacy criteria. So, did it seem true? What's the impact of it? Okay, so just kind of read over those and know that those exist. And people have studied those for your benefit, right? So here, for this slide, I want you to look at figures 9.6 and 9.7 in your book on page 286 through 288 is where this is at. It's going to offer you a checklist, and this is a really good list. I would suggest you copy this and print it out as well as what I mentioned earlier for you to copy and print out. But it's a checklist to assess the quality of your own study or research report. So go and find that and print that out. It's super, super beneficial for you. So here's an example that you can read for a research proposal. So just know that's on page 289, and you can read that in more depth. So that's it, guys. Y'all did amazing. I hope this helps you, and if you have any questions, please let me know, and happy studying. Take care.